Welcome back to Skytech-Lens. In July 2025, Donald Trump and South Korean President Lee Jae-myung announced a historic trade pact. The US would lower tariffs on South Korean goods from 25% to 15%. In return, South Korea would invest $350 billion in American infrastructure and jobs. The handshake was broadcast worldwide, a symbol of renewed alliance and Trump's America First strategy. Trump touted the deal as an upfront cash payment, a direct boost to American industry. Supporters saw it as proof of his tough negotiating style. But beneath the celebration, cracks appeared almost immediately. Seoul clarified, the $350 billion was not a lump sum payment, but a mix of loans, equity, and guarantees over several years. This wasn't a minor detail, it was a fundamental disagreement. Washington wanted cash, Seoul offered phased investment. The handshake was real, but the understanding was not. The stage was set for a clash between political theater and economic reality. The deal's core was simple: lower tariffs for a massive investment. For South Korea, tariff relief meant survival for giants like Samsung and Hyundai. But the US demanded $350 billion in cash, non-negotiable. The administration wanted high-profile projects and a profit-sharing model that heavily favored the US. South Korea countered a phased, mixed financing approach using public and private funds. They simply couldn't pay $350 billion up front without risking their economy. Trump's team saw a trophy, Seoul saw a financial abyss. The US wanted headlines, Korea needed stability. The gap was more than numbers, it was a clash of worldviews. For Washington, it was about power and optics. For Seoul, it was about survival. The two sides were speaking different languages. The deal was already on shaky ground. To grasp Seoul's anxiety, remember the 1997 Asian financial crisis. South Korea's economy nearly collapsed, saved only by a painful IMF bailout. The US demand for $350 billion in cash threatened a repeat of that nightmare. At the time, Korea's reserves were $410 billion. Paying out $350 billion would wipe out 84%. Such a move would trigger capital flight, currency collapse, and mass defaults. The government saw it as economic suicide. The trauma of 1997 haunted every negotiation. Seoul wasn't haggling, they were warning this would bankrupt the country. The deal became a fight for national survival. To protect itself, South Korea requested a currency swap line with the US Federal Reserve, a financial safety net. This would let Seoul access US dollars if markets panicked. President Lee made the swap line a precondition for any deal. Washington flatly refused, offering only vague assurances. The snub was seen as a betrayal. America wanted concessions, but not to share risk. The refusal hardened Seoul's resolve and turned public opinion against the pact. The debate shifted from trade to trust. The deal now looked more like coercion than partnership. US officials pressured Seoul by pointing to Japan's $550 billion investment pledge. But the comparison was deeply flawed. Japan's reserves are $1.3 trillion. $550 billion is 41% of that. Korea's $350 billion was 84% of its reserves. Double the risk. The yen is a global reserve currency with a standing swap line. The won is not. Telling Korea to be like Japan ignored these realities. Seoul saw it as an insult and a sign of American indifference. The Japan analogy backfired, stiffening Korea's resistance. Korean leaders demanded to be judged on their own terms. The US approach only deepened the divide. News of the deal and US demands sparked outrage in South Korea. Opposition leaders called it a surrender of sovereignty. Protests erupted, and President Lee faced threats of impeachment. The deal became a test of patriotism, not just economics. Tensions soared after US agents raided a Hyundai plant in Georgia, detaining hundreds of Korean workers. The images fueled anger. America demanded billions, but treated Korean citizens harshly. The public saw the deal as another example of an unbalanced alliance. What began as economic cooperation now looked like humiliation. The trade dispute unfolded amid rising Indo-Pacific tensions. China, Russia, and North Korea were drawing closer, raising security stakes for Seoul. South Korea's alliance with the US was vital. But economic stability was now seen as part of national defense. A financial crisis would weaken Korea's leverage with China and North Korea. By pushing Seoul to the brink, the US risked undermining its own ally. President Lee drew a line security cooperation would continue. but economic relations must be fair. Korea insisted on respect, not subservience. The rift threatened the U.S. alliance structure at a critical time. A weakened Korea would open doors for China and Russia. The fallout sent a warning to other U.S. allies. Partnership now came with a heavy price. The dispute rattled financial markets. The Korean won slid past 1,400 per dollar. Investors feared a trade war or a forced deal would trigger a crisis. A weaker won meant higher import costs, inflation, and risk of corporate defaults. Wall Street analysts called the U.S. terms commercially absurd. The market turmoil gave Seoul ammunition. This wasn't just harsh, it was irrational. The Trump administration faced real consequences: instability in a key ally's economy. The limits of transactional diplomacy were clear. A one-sided deal threatened not just Korea, but global markets. All eyes turned to the upcoming Apex summit in Seoul, a last chance to save the deal. Trump needed a win. Lee needed safeguards, especially a currency swap. A phased investment and limited swap could let both claim victory. Failure would mean a messy trade dispute and a weakened alliance. For Lee, anything less than real protections would be political suicide. For Trump, collapse would be a major embarrassment. The outcome would ripple far beyond Korea and the US. Success could restore trust. Failure would deepen cracks in the US-led order. The world watched, knowing the future of alliances and global trade hung in the balance. Thanks for watching. Subscribe the channel for more updates.